My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 45 years old, and the moment my brother sneered our eternal waitress during his wedding reception was the moment I decided he would finally learn who truly serves whom in this family. It all began more than 2 decades ago when I walked out of the University of Colorado diploma in hand and straight into the hidden corridors of military intelligence. My work demanded silence, demanded cover stories, demanded I live in the shadows. To my family, silence became absence, and absence turned into failure in their eyes. They filled in the blanks with their own stories. Clearly, I hadn't finished school. Obviously, I'd bounced around between food service jobs too embarrassed to admit my mistakes. The so-called proof was all around them. I lived in a small townhouse outside Denver, drove a dented Toyota, never shared details of my work, and when asked, I'd deflect with vague lines like, oh, government contracts, or I consult for the Navy. My mother Elaine would shake her head and sigh almost theatrically whenever friends asked about me. Rachel. She's still finding her path. I think she's waitressing again. And everyone would nod knowingly with that patronizing look reserved for family members who just couldn't get it together. My younger brother Daniel, 3 years my junior, was the opposite. By 30, he had carved out his name as a rising star in property development, married his college love, and flaunted a life of country club cocktails and glossy magazine spreads. At every gathering, he wielded his success like a weapon. Hey Rachel, still carrying trays. When are you going to get serious about a career? His smirk always came with a toast to his own fortune. The worst was my father Thomas, a grizzled former firefighter who valued visible, tangible work. I don't get that girl, he'd mutter, all that potential, and now she's just scraping plates in some greasy spoon. Waste of a good brain. Christmas dinners, birthday parties, graduations, every milestone became another trial, where I stood accused of being the family disappointment. Introductions to outsiders came wrapped in apology. This is Rachel, she's between things right now. The cruelest cut came from my mother herself. When cousins visited from out of state, she would whisper, "Don't bring up work with Rachel. She's been our eternal waitress for years." It's embarrassing. Eternal waitress. The words followed me everywhere. Holidays, family reunions, Sunday lunches. They never knew that my absences were deployments, that my suntan was from operations overseas, not cocktails at a beach bar. And when I returned home 18 months ago after an assignment that had made headlines, I couldn't claim I knew the time for silence was over. I was between assignments, having just returned from a classified operation in Eastern Europe that I couldn't discuss. My body was worn down, my sleep fractured, and my mind carried the weight of choices that had saved American lives, yet would never see daylight. Hoping for some peace, I attended my grandmother's funeral in Boulder, Colorado, believing that grief might bring the family together. Instead, I found humiliation. As we stood in the receiving line, my Uncle Frank leaned over to his wife, his voice pitched just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "That's Elaine's oldest," he muttered. "The waitress, 45 years old, still pouring coffee. What a shame." The familiar burn of injustice rose in my chest, but something within me shifted. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, sharper. A decision that the masquerade had lasted long enough. But good intelligence officers know one thing above all else. Timing is everything. The right moment arrived 6 months later, my brother Daniel's wedding. He'd found the love of his life, Rebecca, and opted for a grand ceremony at the Air Force Academy Chapel in Colorado Springs. Daniel had chosen it for his wedding, not because he had ties to the service, but because it was dramatic, iconic, and close to home. He wanted military grandeur without ever understanding its meaning. The irony was sharp. He stood on sacred ground dedicated to service while mocking the one person in the room who had actually lived it. The irony was exquisite. He'd picked a place drenched in the very history I had lived, oblivious that he was staging his triumph on ground that echoed with my own past oaths of service. On the morning of the wedding, I stood alone in my townhouse staring at the dress blues hanging in my closet. Captain Rachel Donovan, 15 years of active duty, decorated combat veteran, current operations director coordinating Navy intelligence with Special Forces. Every thread of that uniform had been bought with blood, grit, and sacrifice. And yet, my family had never seen it. To them, my silence was failure. To me, it was necessity. Each deployment, each medal, each clandestine mission demanded secrecy. And their gossip filled the void. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Daniel looked dashing, Rebecca glowed with joy, and the soaring glass and steel of the chapel caught the morning light in brilliant colors. I sat quietly in the back, dressed in a simple navy gown, listening as the chaplain, a Navy captain, spoke eloquently about duty, sacrifice, and honor. I wondered if Daniel understood the weight of those words in this sacred space. The reception was held at the Academy's Officers' Club. That's where the old script began again. Relatives I hadn't seen in years drifted toward me, plastering on smiles and wielding barbed questions wrapped in false concern. So Rachel, still between jobs, asked my cousin Janet, her tone dripping with expectation of disappointment. I smiled but said nothing. Before I could answer my cousin's loaded question, Daniel swept in with a cluster of his college friends trailing behind him. His voice carried across the polished wood floors of the Officers' Club. "Oh, that's my sister Rachel. She's been in food service for, 20 years now?" He chuckled, the sound slicing through the elegant reception like a blade. "Rebecca and I keep telling her she should branch out, but you know how it is. Some people get comfortable staying where they are." The group around him laughed politely, though their eyes flickered with discomfort. One guest, attempting kindness, offered, "Well, the service industry is important too." Daniel seized the moment, puffing his chest. "Oh, absolutely. Rachel's our eternal waitress, aren't you, sis?" He raised his champagne flute in a mock toast. "Here's to Rachel, always serving others, literally." The laughter that followed was genteel but pointed, like the clinking of glass against stone. I felt the familiar heat of humiliation rise in my chest, but this time it was tempered by anticipation. I excused myself calmly and walked toward the bar. Leaning close to the bartender, I whispered, "Would you let Commander Ramirez know that Captain Donovan would like a word on the terrace?" 5 minutes later, Commander Alejandro Ramirez, the Academy's commandant, and a man I'd worked alongside during a joint intelligence mission in North Africa, stepped onto the terrace. His face broke into a genuine smile. "Captain Donovan, I had no idea you were here. It's been 3 years since Algiers. Too long, sir." He studied me, then frowned when I explained. "Your own family doesn't know operational security became family silence," I admitted. "But I think it's time for a revelation." He nodded slowly, a flicker of anger sparking on my behalf. "What do you need from me?" "Just the truth, sir, when the time comes." We returned to the reception together, slipping quietly into the periphery as Daniel took his place at the head table. He was in his element, glass-raised voice booming, relishing the attention. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. "Rebecca and I are so grateful for your love and support. And what better place to celebrate than here at the Academy, a place that embodies excellence, achievement, and rising to challenges." He gestured expansively at the vaulted windows, the flags, the proud history etched into the space. His eyes found mine across the room. He smirked. "Of course not. Everyone shares that drive. Some people are content staying in their comfort zone. Like my sister Rachel over there." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. And if you're just as ready as I was for Daniel to finally learn the truth, make sure you hit subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what happens next. I felt every gaze in the room shift toward me. Daniel's voice carried the same old smug cadence, polished for the crowd. "Rachel's been in food service for years," he announced, relishing the spotlight. "And while we've told her she could aim higher, she seems happy being our eternal waitress." A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Then silence. Guests shifted in their chairs, caught between amusement and discomfort, unsure if this public humiliation of family was meant as humor or cruelty. That's when Commander Ramirez rose from his chair. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the tension like a blade. "Excuse me, did you just call someone in this room a waitress?" Daniel blinked briefly, mistaking the captain's intervention for approval. He puffed out his chest. "Yes, sir. My sister Rachel. She's worked in restaurants for stop talking." Commander Ramirez's tone carried the weight of 25 years in uniform. The air froze. He strode deliberately toward the head table, his dress whites gleaming beneath the chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to correct a serious error that's been spoken tonight." Daniel's color drained. "Sir, I'm not sure I said stop talking." The words landed like a gavel. Ramirez turned to face the room. His voice rose steady and clear. "The woman this man just mocked is Captain Rachel Donovan, United States Navy. She's not in uniform tonight because she is off duty attending a family event. But make no mistake, her service is real and it is extraordinary." A wave of murmurs swept across the room. My mother's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile. "Captain Donovan graduated near the top of her class from the Naval Academy," Ramirez continued. "She has served on multiple overseas operations, earned the Bronze Star with valor, and currently directs intelligence coordination with Special Forces. The details of her work are classified, but I can assure you they involve safeguarding American lives and national security." He turned deliberately back to Daniel. "The so-called waitress you mocked outranks most officers in the Navy. She outranks me. When she enters a room full of military personnel, we stand at attention." A hush fell. All that could be heard was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of my own heartbeat. "The truth, young man," Ramirez finished, his gaze hard, "is that the only person here who has spent her career truly serving others is your sister. And she's done it at a cost and sacrifice you can't begin to imagine." Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her wide eyes fixed on me. My father, the hardened firefighter, slowly rose from his chair. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Rachel." Commander Ramirez looked at me, then inclined his head. "Captain, would you like to say a few words?" I stood 15 years of silence heavy on my shoulders and finally let it go. "Hello, everyone." "Yes," I said evenly, "I work for the Navy. I have for the past 15 years. I'm sorry I couldn't share the details before. Much of what I do is classified." My mother finally found her voice thin and trembling. "But your apartment? Your car? You never said." I met her eyes. "I live modestly because I'm often deployed. I drive a reliable car because I need something that starts after sitting unused for months. And I've deflected questions because the documents I signed make it a federal crime to discuss certain operations outside secure channels." I looked slowly around the room, faces I had known all my life, but for the first time they were truly seeing me. "Every time you called me your eternal waitress, I was coordinating operations with Navy SEALs. Every time you whispered about my lack of ambition, I was making decisions that shaped national security. And every time you introduced me as your disappointing daughter, I was serving my country with honor." My Uncle Frank, who had mocked me at my grandmother's funeral, stared down at his hands. My cousin Janet's eyes darted toward the exit as though she wished she could vanish. But it was Daniel's face that struck me most. His smugness had dissolved into something far heavier, devastation mixed with the dawning realization of just how wrong, how cruel, and how public his mockery had been. "Daniel," I said quietly, though my voice carried across the hushed room, "you chose to hold your wedding here at the Air Force Academy. You wanted honor, tradition, excellence as your backdrop." I paused deliberately. "You got your wish. But the honor was already in your family. You just never bothered to look for it." Commander Ramirez stepped forward. "If I may, Captain, I'd like to share one more detail." I nodded, curious. Captain Donovan recently concluded an operation that resulted in the rescue of 17 American hostages from a terrorist network. She coordinated with CIA operatives, Army Rangers, and a Navy SEAL unit across 3 countries over 6 months. The mission was a complete success, zero American casualties. Gasps spread through the room. Ramirez turned his gaze on Daniel. So when you said some people rise to challenges and others stay in their comfort zone, you were right. Your sister has risen to challenges that would break most people, all while operating so far outside any comfort zone that you can't even imagine it. The aftermath was swift and merciless in the way only truth can be. Relatives approached me with hushed apologies, their eyes heavy with shame. Others slipped quietly out, unable to reconcile the family myth with the reality before them. When the last guests had gone, my parents sat beside me for hours, their voices softer than I'd ever heard them. They asked careful questions about my service, my life, my years of silence. For the first time, they listened. My father's eyes wet with tears reached for me. Rachel, I'm so sorry I doubted you all these years. His grip was firm, the same hands that had fought fires for decades now trembling as they held mine. My mother clasped my other hand, her voice breaking. I'm proud of you. I should have been proud long before tonight. As I prepared to leave the hall, Daniel intercepted me. Rebecca had already disappeared to their suite, whether from shame or anger I couldn't tell. My brother's face, usually smug and self-assured, looked hollow. Rachel, He faltered the words, catching in his throat. I don't even know how to apologize for tonight, for the last 20 years. For building myself up by tearing you down. I studied him, and for the first time in years I didn't see my tormentor. I saw a man who had hidden his own insecurity behind superiority, who had believed his own story about my failure. You can start, I said gently, by understanding that success isn't always visible. And that service, whether it's serving coffee or serving your country, is never something to mock. 3 months later, Daniel called me. His voice was subdued. Rebecca and we're divorcing. The truth had unraveled everything. She had admitted she married him partly for the image of being tied to a successful family. When she learned he'd spent their entire relationship belittling someone whose service and achievements dwarfed his own, her respect evaporated. Their marriage lasted barely 6 weeks beyond that night. Meanwhile, my relationship with my father transformed. Once a month, we meet for lunch. He tells me stories about his years in the firehouse, and I share what little I can about my service, always careful with the classified parts. Now when he introduces me to his old colleagues, it's with pride. This is my daughter, Captain Donovan. The pride in his voice still startles me. My mother, too, has become my fiercest advocate. She seems determined to make up for lost years by speaking of me to anyone who will listen. She even volunteers now with military family support groups, often saying it's penance for not knowing her own daughter was a hero. But the greatest change hasn't been in them, it's been in me. For 15 years, I carried the weight of their disappointment alongside the burdens of my service. I thought I was protecting them by hiding the truth, but really I was shielding myself from choosing between peace and dignity. That night freed me. No longer Captain Donovan in one world and the family disappointment in another. Now there is only one version of me, a woman who chose to serve, who earned her place, and who learned the deepest kindness isn't in keeping secrets, but in trusting others with the truth. I carried silence for years, letting others define me until the truth could no longer stay hidden. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, judged, or mislabeled by the very people who should have stood by you? Share your stories in the comments, I'll be reading them. Support me by hitting that subscribe button, so together we can build a community that values resilience and truth over appearances. And remember this. Your worth is not measured by how loudly others dismiss you, but by how steadfastly you hold on to your purpose. Never let anyone rewrite your story.